The Spin-off Podcast Network.
Are you making the most of your KiwiSaver investment? Generate is an award-winning KiwiSaver provider with a track record of strong long-term performance. Making a smart decision now could add tens of thousands of dollars by the time you reach retirement. Book a no-obligation chat with a Generate KiwiSaver advisor today at generatekiwisaver.co.nz/get-advice. A copy of the product disclosure statement is available at generatekiwisaver.co.nz. The issuer of the scheme is Generate Investment Management Limited, and of course, past performance does not guarantee future returns.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. With the price of just about everything going up during inflation, we thought we'd bring our prices down. So to help us, we brought in a reverse auctioneer, which is apparently a thing.
Mint Mobile Unlimited Premium Wireless. How to get 30, 30, bit to get 30, bit to get 20, 20, 20, bit to get 20, 20, bit to get 15, 15, 15, 15, just $15 a month? Sold! Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 up front for 3 months plus taxes and fees. Promo rate for new customers for limited time. Unlimited more than 40 gigabytes per month. Slows full terms at mintmobile.com.
Should we start the podcast? Kia ora tātou, my name is Toby Manhire. This is Gone By Lunchtime. It's a politics podcast on the spinoff.co.nz, produced with the support of Flick Electric. Good click of the fingers there by Annabelle Lee on the Foley. Flick Electric, just click through. Can you have a click through from any politics page on the spinoff and you'll get there.
I'm so multi-talented.
Annabelle Lee Mather is multi-talented. She's just commenced a new series of The Hui.
Yes.
On TV3, 3 when it's on air and there's no power cut.
Should have been on Flick Electric.
Sunday morning. Oh, nice. That is so good.
Thanks, I work in PR.
Hui is on Sunday mornings at
9:30 a.m.
9:30 a.m. Not to be missed.
But if you do, you can watch the repeat on Monday evening after News Hub late. It's sexier when it's later.
Flick electric powered television. Mm-hmm. How's that been? Any jobs going at where is it you work? Excelsior?
Oh, right.
No, I think I could get into a bit of PR.
There's always a place for good people like you.
Ben Thomas, what have you been up to? Who are you shilling for lately?
I'm what I've been dedicating my efforts to right now is fortifying my body, i.e. my temple, against the onslaught of coronavirus. I'm on day 2 of non-smoking in order to bolster my body's immune system for the upcoming winter, and also to avoid the public suspicion that comes with having a hacking cough right now in public.
He's also, listeners, Ben is currently in a large plastic bubble, a bit like the bubble boy from that episode of Seinfeld. Remember that, Bells? He's looking good in there, don't you think?
Safety first, everybody.
Thanks to Alice Webber-Dull, who's on the tools for us. Is that what you say? She's producing this podcast, and we thank her for it.
On the decks.
That's good. Yeah, that sounds... Well, she'll probably
the wheels of steel.
Drop some beats soon. How has the political response to COVID-19 been as we speak? A third case has been confirmed. I think we're still waiting to find out whether or not the partner of the 30-something woman who returned from northern Italy will test positive too. There's a reasonably high likelihood he will, as he was showing symptoms, so it may be 4 by the time you hear this. Who knows? That's kind of... feels like we're on a track towards...
pandemonium.
We are not on a track towards pandemonium. The New Zealand Herald got a little bit overexcited on the weekend and went with pandemonium on the front page.
To be honest,
World War V on the front page was business.
But do you get it? It's a pun because it's like a pandemic, and it's also the end of society as we know it.
It's not a pun if it's... No, never mind.
To be honest, I thought a lot of those queues were for the 50 million lotto ticket. People lining up to buy the lotto ticket. I think we confused
That's
Our
true.
pandemonium
It was the only
tanga.
paper available. They were like, I want 50 tickets. 50 tickets to stack by my loo.
I feel like this all fits into a Dan Brown novel somewhere with the number 19 on the bonus ball or some shit. How's the response been, Ben? Proportionate? Appropriate?
Yeah, sensible. Although it occurred to me the other day that I didn't know what the symptoms of coronavirus were.
Hacking cough?
Yeah, hacking cough, fever.
Hanging out in a bubble?
No, that's a symptom of someone who definitely doesn't have the coronavirus.
That's interesting. That's a good point. Yeah, I mean,
And so there was a lot of what I saw was a lot of disinformation, a lot of debunking from good news sources like the Spin-Off.
a lot of debunking, but not enough bunking.
Yeah, I and look, that's my fault. I didn't go to the Ministry of Health website or anything because I like to think I'm a heavy, unhealthily heavy news consumer, and I still thought that people who were sort of sneezing were a big coronavirus vector. So I've ended a lot of friendships unnecessarily in this period of ignorance.
And what are the symptoms to look out for?
Well, isn't it like hacking cough and high fever and
Having been to Northern Italy recently.
Well, yeah, risk factors are having been to Northern Italy. If somebody has a hacking cough and then goes, "Mamma mia," probably then you might want to get a test done if you've been in contact with that person.
I'd like to apologise to the Italian community for that stereotyping. Let's not go to Iran and Iran. Bells, what do you reckon? There's been some criticism on the spin-off yesterday. Susie Wiles, who's kind of far and away the outstanding communicator on this, microbiologist, criticised Simon Bridges for some of his response. It seems to me he's toned it down a bit.
Just because you're the leader of the opposition doesn't mean you always have to oppose, particularly when it's sensible advice meant to protect our communities. Yeah.
It's a tricky one, right? Because that's his job as leader of the opposition is to hold the government to account, and that means that there is almost a kind of reflexive critique. And I don't know. I mean, obviously, it's okay to criticise, say, Trump's seemingly pretty hopeless management of it. So why isn't it? I mean, isn't it okay to just criticise the Prime Minister, or is there a different set of rules that apply at a public emergency?
I'm no public health expert, so it's not clear to me how they could
agree to disagree, but carry on.
that closing the borders to China, I mean, some people would say that was an overreaction. Most people think it's a proportionate response. At that point, what do we do? Do we close the border to, every country in the world? Do we just go into a bunker for 3 years and then re-emerge and see what's happened in 2023?
There was a poll reported on Stuff this morning by a polling company that I didn't recognise, in which it found that more than half of those surveyed felt that we should shut our borders to pretty much everywhere that had cases of COVID-19, which would be quite cool, like to shut our borders to Australia and
the United States.
So yeah, it is. There is a balance to be found somewhere, right? Like you go, public health emergency, let's just shut the borders completely, and then you might create one or two.
Yeah, I mean, look, we don't
in doing so.
I mean, yeah, you could be forgiven for thinking that people are dropping dead of coronavirus in the streets as we speak. Right now, it's still pretty contained. We have 4, or it seems to be contained at any rate. In terms of the more, I think it's pretty clear the most valuable steps the government can take are public education campaigns to make sure that everyone's sensible. I mean, stemming the spread of this virus, is not going to require much more of a sacrifice than people being sensible, washing their hands, not sneezing on other people. Nothing's determined. You can't stop these things. They're germs. You can't just pass a law against them. But in terms of its other responses, the government is looking at, ways of dealing with people whose jobs are affected, particularly in forestry. There's been a lot of, obviously our exports have been hit by this because we aren't the only people closing our borders. We aren't the only people shutting down work sites. So it's hitting people in the regions pretty hard. Phil Twyford has announced that they'll have some kind of scheme to potentially relocate people into government jobs, for the duration of the crisis. So this is like taking forestry workers in the middle of the North Island and then putting them to work clearing paths on dockland in the South Island, which is a pretty good Keynesian response to the economic slowdown which is anticipated as a result of coronavirus. This is a little different from a normal threatened recession in the sense that the coronavirus actually does affect capacity quite a lot, because you don't really want big labour camps full of hundreds of people living in tents together, during a possible pandemic. So it's not just a matter of pumping money into things, but where the government can make a difference on that. So one of the other things they've signalled is that they're going to relax the stand-down period for people who lose their jobs as a result of the crisis, so they don't have to wait 2 weeks before they get the dole. These are pretty sensible short-term measures.
Yeah, there was even some discussion this morning about possible wage relief that wasn't ruled out by the finance minister. The Grant Robertson has been working pretty hard to try and ameliorate, or at least to communicate with the business community that things are under control. There was I went to a Auckland Business Chamber lunch last week where Robertson was laying out the different scenarios and what they'd mean, and there were questions about whether or not businesses had been consulted enough, especially, I guess, Annabelle, the two big ones. When you consider our economic links with China are education and the tertiary sector especially, there are literally thousands of students who aren't able to start their courses in New Zealand. And then, of course, tourism, when Chinese tourism is just such a big part of the New Zealand economy. And then on top of which there are all the little details, like I have a friend who I had dinner with the other night who runs a shop in Wellington, and the shop is moving from one premises to another, but they can't open the new premises until they get the refrigeration equipment that is sitting on a dock somewhere in China waiting to, and so all of these knock-on things and supply chains, it has a real world impact, right, on little New Zealand.
It does, and not just in terms of business and stuff, but culturally as well. Like I know that the advice has come out that Māori should refrain from hongiing during hui, but I went to a hui last night and everyone did hongi, and afterwards I was talking to one of the kaumātua, and he talked about that advice and how it just did not feel right for them to follow it. Equally, I've seen people on Twitter saying that our tikanga has to evolve and move with the times, and the decision not to hongi is a tough one but a brave one. And it's I'm a little bit frustrated. I think the advice about wash your hands and don't be racist is a really good starting point. But I'm also a little bit frustrated by some of the commentary around it, in terms of, don't overreact, it's really not a big deal, it's not much worse than a cold. But for te iwi Māori who do hongi, who do tend to have lots of people in confined spaces, for people who share cars with their loved ones as their residence, for people who gather at marae, it is a little bit more serious, and I do think that we can't afford to be too blasé about it. I'm also aware too that Aotearoa, we hold a special position of being the gateway to the rest of the Pacific, and I am really concerned about, we've just had the measles rip through Samoa, and I'm like, what happens if it gets over there? So I do think that that we can't be too dismissive of the effects of coronavirus, and that we do have to be mindful of our most vulnerable communities.
I mean, it's certainly serious. I mean, imagine if 1 out of, every 25 people or 30 people that you knew died when they got the flu.
That's right.
Each year. I mean, so, it's certainly not a trivial challenge. I mean, the real bad sign, for the coronavirus from, despite, I think the Herald probably overhyped it a little bit. People have been going a little crazy in some of the supermarkets. You see it in Australia as well.
Yeah.
Panic buying toilet paper for some reason. Like do most people only buy 2 rolls a week and just sort of try and get by? This is,
I think I feel like that's a place where there probably should have been a bit more messaging too about panic buying, because I think it was Susie that said, that actually panic buying makes things worse for our most vulnerable communities, because when they need the hand sanitizer and all of that, there's none left because all the panic merchants have gone in and swept everything.
All disasters always hit the poorest hardest, and this is not a great sign for how we're going to deal with the climate apocalypse when it happens. If people's immediate reaction is to start hoarding goods and sort of, going out and buying 1,000 face masks rather than just washing their hands thoroughly. It seems that adaptation is not quite as easy as climate skeptics have always suggested that it might be.
Speaking of the climate apocalypse, Scott Morrison, he was speaking alongside Jacinda Ardern at the end of last week in Sydney, and he had a very interesting look on his face as he was chastised in terms that we're not particularly used to seeing by Ardern over, first of all, the different rights accorded to New Zealand residents in Australia, but then also the deportation policy. And she came up with she said that the policy was corrosive to the relationship, and that they should not deport their problems as a country. And it was, I was watching it thinking that we'd get the sort of normal kind of slightly diplomatic, slightly coded, but she's been, politicians of all stripes have been clear on this, but it felt like it went up a gear.
She gave him both barrels.
Yeah,
she gave him both barrels. I think what she said was right on, and it's a message that perhaps we should have been delivering earlier. I know the last government was reluctant to, and obviously this government too has tried to rely on diplomacy and our ANZAC relationship and, their soft skills to try and fix what's happening, but obviously that's had zero effect. I thought what she said was great. I couldn't help but wonder, given the criticism she was facing at home about letting Winston off the hook around the donations, the photography, all of that, if she felt like she needed to flex to show us that she can be stroppy and talk the hard talk when she needs to.
Sorry about that. It's Alex Casey from The Real Pod here.
And this is Duncan from The Real Pod. We're here to tell you that as well as enjoying this podcast, you should also listen to ours.
It's a reality television and real life in New Zealand podcast recorded every week. It's relevant.
It's not relevant. It's crazy.
It's real. It's raw.
It's three mates having a nice time and talking about the television.
If you like popular culture, if you like celebrities, if you like reality TV, or even if you hate it all, have a listen. You might be surprised.
Yeah, definitely if you hate it all.
If you hate us,
well,
lots of ammo.
It might be an issue.
Lots of ammo.
The spinoff.co.nz, search Real Pod, you might have a nice time.
Maybe.
There had been clearly some questions raised by various commentators and opposition politicians about the strength of Ardern's leadership, and so cynical reading of that set piece in Sydney was that it was an expression of leadership and a shifting of the subject. Ben, how cynical are you? Are you going to give us a savvy political take on this?
Well, I think there's three things that it demonstrates. Yeah, it's.
Should we go and grab a?
Should we
try to go and have a coffee?
Yeah.
Okay.
Go, Uncle.
I'll send Alice down to get you like midway through point number 2. No. I mean, the first thing is it shows a coarsening of diplomatic dialogue that I think you can probably trace directly back to the election of Donald Trump. I used to deal with MFAT occasionally for announcements when I worked in Parliament, and every sentence was sort of so sanded off and rounded down as to be, in my view, meaningless.
But a blob of cordial.
Yeah, but according to the diplomats, was sort of pregnant with meaning and force and nuance.
Yes. We have never used a comma in this fashion before.
This is not the time for exclamation marks.
And now an exclamation mark is a declaration of war, right? And whereas now, thanks to basically almost threatening war over tweets and things, in order probably to make a point, you actually have to use real person language now. Second thing, this plays well probably for Ardern, and Morrison would probably both be pretty happy with how the press conference went. She got to stand up for the rights of New Zealanders and for her principles. Morrison got to give a firm, no thank you to New Zealand's demands.
Just quickly on that, I mean, that's become like the savvy commentary that it works for both of them. It's all preordained. Maybe, but I'm just a guy looking at a screen, looking at another guy with a face that is kind of crumpled. He just wasn't enjoying that. Like, maybe, obviously, it was discussed in advance, and I'm going to say some things that are quite, and it's like, yes,
Pointed.
we understand that. I don't think he enjoyed that. Is it good for him? Maybe. He got to reassert their policy and their position, but I don't think he enjoyed being publicly dressed down by Jacinda Ardern.
I
That is my
agree,
opinion.
Tobe. I think she gave him a good kick in the balls, and I don't think he appreciated it.
Yeah, look, I think that it was better for her than it was for him.
Yeah,
but remember, they're
definitely.
appealing to two different audiences.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then the third thing is, it's this was at a time when she was looking particularly weak and is still looking particularly weak in her dealings with this is when she was looking particularly weak in her dealings with Winston Peters over the New Zealand First Foundation, basically turning a blind eye, saying it's no business of mine whether my Deputy Prime Minister's party is being investigated by the Serious Fraud Office. Why would that ever come up in our conversations? We're both busy people. And then she's the big tough guy with Morrison. Then she comes back home. Shane Jones starts sounding off about Indians. She's asked whether it's racist. She's like, well, let's not label this. And then they say, you're going to talk to Shane Jones about it, and she's like, I will air my disagreement with him.
Hey, can I just say about the Australian stuff? I mean, we talk a lot of shit about Winston Peters on this podcast, and rightly so, but his cordial last week, now and then, just when you think, God, he pulls it out. Did you see his comments?
No.
Oh,
he put Dutton on blast.
He put him on blast.
Oh, I missed that. What did he say?
He said, your citizen came over and committed one of the worst atrocities ever to happen on our shores.
And he said, you didn't hear us complaining?
You didn't hear
that's the
country.
allegation that is made, and there would be a court case to determine that. Yeah.
And you didn't hear our citizens, complaining about Australia. All we're asking is that you treat us fairly.
Peter Dutton, hard to like him. I think it's fair to say. Like, if when you saw him having a go at Jacinda Ardern, you think again, like, who does that work for? It's kind of, happy birthday, Peter Dutton is having a go. You mentioned Shane Jones, Ben, who made life difficult again for Jacinda Ardern. Meanwhile, Winston Peters Korero, almost at the same time, in India, was bigging up the relationship, including by reference to the education links between the two countries. It does. I mean, I don't know. And both Shane Jones, who doubled down on it, by the way, after Jacinda Ardern said that she'd be talking to him, that it wasn't acceptable, he's like, fuck that, basically. I will say what I like. He said it's election year. Jacinda Ardern said it's election year in her comments. They both said that phrase, which is a bit like, guys, get used to it. There's going to be more of this, right? That's just what we've got now. And it sort of, I don't know. I find the whole idea
give
quite
nothing
exhausting.
to racism. Unless it's election.
And
then you can give a little bit.
Just a little carve out on the racism point. It's what's going to happen, right? That's the year.
Yeah.
That people going to, I don't know. I keep every press release that comes from the Greens or the New Zealand First now has an obligatory in the subject header. It's a win for. The whole word is a win. Yeah. They've got to get a win. They've got to get noticed. They've got to do what they've got to do.
I thought what was funny about Jones and Winston when they justified it was that these are the comments that have been made by the Indian community themselves. Right. It's like, yes, and the critical factor here is that they're Indians and you guys aren't.
Also,
small difference, but important.
Also, I watched that interview. There was absolutely it was about how people from India are ruining our universities and people from New Delhi, and it was just sort of cropped out. It's like he'd plucked that out. I don't know why he plucked that one out, whether he'd thought it through or whether it was just because he knew the boss was in India and so it was in his... But it wasn't in any way a suggestion about internecine immigrant communities and their issues. It wasn't even close to that. I mean, that's just complete balderdash.
No, that's right. I mean, I think he was referring to the private tertiary, what are they called? Private training enterprises, whatever, the PTEs.
Yeah.
Which are a sham, most of them.
Well,
by and large.
There have been a lot of scandals around.
The vast majority of the sector is a scam, and it only varies in whether it's a scam perpetrated against Immigration New Zealand or against the students themselves.
Sure.
But these things started off as shams in the education reforms, and they, it's certainly not a case of Indian students came over and ruined these wonderful institutions of English language and golf that were, charging $8,000 a semester. So, I mean, it was racist, it was inflammatory, and cuts against everything that the Prime Minister's branding stands for. But this government, or the Labour Party, seems so terrified by the prospect that New Zealand First will force them to have an election before their budget, election year budget, that they seem willing to completely rewrite the cabinet manual. But Jacinda Ardern has basically said that anything that is done by a member of another party is none of her business as Prime Minister. She said that Shane Jones is in another party, and so she can't discipline him as a minister. She can't call him into talk to him about his conduct. She can't, she certainly can't give him orders as a minister in her cabinet. And it's incredible because the PM is the only asset that the Labour Party have to take into this election. They don't have a record of success to run on with Kiwi Build, with the trams, which are now, a million years away. They've built a few social houses and they had their mini budget, almost 2.5 years ago now, which was which raised various benefits and implemented the winter electricity allowance. But apart from that, all they have to run on is the fact that the public really likes the Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern. They like her because she's kind, because she's got integrity, and these are all things that are being chipped away by her partner New Zealand First. Now, New Zealand First are screwed in this election right now. Their public polling has them at about 3%. They have been ruled out by National. Last time they were ruled out by National, they didn't make 5. They're surrounded by scandal. New Zealand First are basically dead, and they're asking Labour to pay for the funeral.
Oh,
cool.
Interesting. Cool. Or for the exhumation? Is that I wondered.
What I did find a little bit ironic though was when Simon came out and called Jacinda out for not calling out Shane Jones, because last week one of his own ministers called a mongrel mob figure, Mark Mitchell, called Sonny, I think he was meant to refer to Sonny Fatu, but he called him Sonny Toe, because, all old brown Maori guys all look alike. While Sonny Toe may be no angel, he is not a leading figure within the mongrel mob. So it's like, I don't know if you guys have a lot of moral high ground there to stand
Sonny
on.
Toe's not been terribly visible in the headlines lately, though, either.
No.
Former chairman of
Former
Te
chairman.
Runga, of Onapui.
We're not going to get into the whole gang stuff today. We'll do that another time. I just briefly a thought. Is there which I've been wondering about for a while, maybe it's crazy, is there some way in which it would work for both New Zealand First and the Labour Party for Jacinda Ardern to fire Shane Jones from Cabinet? I mean, I can see the issues with that. Like, obviously, it suggests disarray. Obviously, he's got some announcements to make in Northland within government. So there's all that. I can see that. So it would have to be a kind of desperate state of things. But there is some way in which he would be fired. Winston Peters would be appalled, but for the stability of the country would carry on. Then from semi-outside the tent, Shane could go on a anti-government rampage, ratchet it up on immigration, everything like that.
I mean, does it really need to be that extreme? Can't you just say, I've called him into my office and I've told him to stop being a dick?
No, because he'll just...
And he's told me he's not going to be a dick. Whether or not he actually stops being a dick is another thing, but I've asked him.
It's just, I mean, in terms of that chipping away, every time that Jacinda Ardern says, I've spoken to Shane Jones, it's completely, and then he goes, and graffiti's all over her front gate, you know?
I wouldn't have thought it was beyond their ken to do just what the diplomats do and completely choreograph it. So that he can just keep pushing later on. She says, yes, I've given him a stir. She says, yes, I've talked to him. Briefs journalists on background that actually she really ripped shreds off him.
Yeah.
Then in public, he's defiant but chastened. And then he does it again in another month or whatever, right? And I mean, if you wanted to be cynical, that's how it would work better. But having the Prime Minister stand up and say, well, I haven't talked to him about it. I will talk to him. I'll tell him that I disagree with his statements personally and I'll ask him to reconsider his views, makes her sound like a little weakie. It makes her sound like just somebody who has no control over their situation. And elections are about leadership. We see that in the States, right? You can have as good a campaign as you want. You can spend $500 million, but if the public isn't buying what you're selling, then you're in trouble. This campaign, it's going to be a horse race between National and Labour, basically, for pole position. No, sorry, it's a mixed metaphor. And
no, they have a in the car racing. You have a race to see who gets pole position, so that's fine.
But he said a horse race.
Oh, no, that's terrible.
I fucked it up.
Yeah, that sucks.
Just let's start the whole pod again.
Go from the top, Alice.
Yeah.
In the American election, we're going to spend the next hour and a half talking about the American election. Now that it's the Democratic primary, it's Biden versus, what's the other guy's name, Sanders. I just had a look before, and the last time there was a Democratic nominee that was born before them was Michael Dukakis in 1988. That's how fucking old they are.
Yeah.
They're so old that this is the good news for the Democrats is that they will not have a baby boomer candidate for the presidency because they're too old to be baby boomers. They're too old.
What do you call the generation before boomers?
They call them the silent generation, I believe.
God,
I think that was kind of retroactively applied a bit, and then the generation before that they called the golden generation.
The golden
generation, which is pretty cool, and that's fine because if you're still around, you get to be. So, speaking of age,
speaking of
and
rich old people,
respect for our elders, you've got a fire in your belly, in your plastic bubble, Ben Thomas, about superannuation?
I mean, Radio New Zealand had a story last week, fantastic story, which revealed that last year the number of over 65s who were claiming the universal superannuation allowance, which is about 19-20 grand a year, who were at the same time earning over $100,000 of taxable income in the same year, had reached 30,000 people. Right, that's a full rugby stadium that it costs $500 million at least each year to give over 65s who are already in the top 10% of all income earners in the country. This is individuals. We're not talking about a broad generational thing. We're talking about rich individuals are getting $500 million. With that money, you could give every person on the sole parent benefit a 10 grand increase per year.
The people whom, it's been pointed out, and I'm playing devil's advocate here, leave me alone, who will pay that amount of money in tax. In order, by virtue of the fact that they're earning more than 100K, they're paying that money in tax.
Well, sure, but so are people who are earning 100K and not getting $20,000 in superannuation.
That's true, but a way of looking at it is they're getting a tax break for being old.
It's not. No, that would be a fake argument in the same way that because it's just an extra $20,000. Now, whether they get taxed on it or not, you can sort of. You can tag the money whatever way you like, but it's not a tax break. It's just.
I mean, it would be a tax break on the 100K.
It's just a lump of money for being an old person. Are you going to
stick up for senior citizens, or are you too?
Fuck them.
This is.
I would be happy for that money to go to our elderly poor, of which there are plenty. There's old people doing it tough on the benefit, but not the ones earning 100K plus already. I would much rather see that money dispersed amongst our oldies doing it tough and our solo parents and their tamariki. I mean, if you want to alleviate child poverty, here's a glaring example of where you could do something. Yeah, very easily. It's not that fucking complicated.
That's right.
Shame on you, boomers.
Whenever you get into the weeds with the nerds on Twitter.
We don't want to go on for too long. The other argument is that this is why get stuck into a universal benefit? A universal benefit is a good idea. Here we have a effective pilot program for a UBI. It should be that universality is a good idea. Once you start trying to means test things, it just becomes awfully complicated. Lawyers make a lot of money. Accountants make a lot of money. Why not introduce universality in the form of a UBI? One really quick thought on that from each of you, because it's a really simple subject.
If you want a steeply progressive increased taxation for the rich system, then you can have that. That's a separate question from, given the myriad, impossibly innumerable demands on government spending, to make an active decision that we're going to give $500 million to wealthy old people. People say, universality is a good thing. We should have a UBI. We should have more generous welfare payments. This is the first step. It's not the first step. How many of those $100,000 a year plus, 2,500 of whom are on 300 grand a year and still claiming universal super, how many of those people do you think actually vote in each election for higher welfare payments or for universal education? Baby boomers only want benefits for themselves. There is no first step. There is just entrenching the benefit of this greedy vampire class of people in our society.
Outrageous generalization.
They will not.
Outrageous generalization.
The only thing that will stop them using their free Waiheke Island gold for card fares is a coronavirus outbreak.
And every night
I have never loved you more than I do right now.
Can I just say one thing before Ben completely bursts out of his bubble and starts oozing, suppurating from every orifice?
It's so steamy in there, I can't even see him.
Pussy COVID-19 froth. Spend My Super There's something that a friend of the Spin-Off has started recently, and it's a system by where if you do earn a lot of money and don't need your super, you can instead put it towards a very good charity like Child Poverty Action Group.
Cool.
Check it out, Spend My Super. We did it. There was a partner piece on the Spin-Off. Have a look at that. It's a good idea.
I love that.
Should be at least 30,000 new sign-ups in the next week.
Thanks, Annabelle. Thanks, Ben. Thanks, Alice. Oh, join Spin-Off members too. It's cool. Bye. I'm Toby Manhire, and this is Juggernaut, the story of the fourth Labour government. A podcast in 6 parts.
Doesn't give my opponents much time to run up to an election, does it?
This nation is at risk.
What do you think you're up to now, you perverted little liar?
I could smell the uranium on it as you lean towards the
There's a radical overhaul in the history of New Zealand's administration.
Juggernaut, the story of the fourth Labour government. Made with the support of New Zealand On Air. Listen now on the Spin-Off or wherever you get your podcasts.
Are you curious about how business can be better? I'm Simon Pound, and I host Business is Boring, a podcast where I kōrero with some of the most interesting people in entrepreneurship, commerce, and making things happen. Tune in to Business is Boring every Tuesday, brought to you by the Spin-Off Podcast Network in partnership with Spark Business Lab. The Spin-Off Podcast Network.